I'm Jackie Jacobson, MLA for Nunavut and Chair of the committee. Today I would receive a public technical briefing on the Remediation Economy discussion paper with the Deputy Minister of Environment and Natural Resources and staff of ENR, EC&E, and ITI. I'd like to remind all the members, presenters, to direct all questions and comments to myself as chair and wait to be recognized before speaking to have a good smooth meeting. Now I'll ask the members to introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Ryland Johnson.
Good morning, everyone. Ryland Johnson, MLA for Yellowknife North.
Good morning, Ron Bonadrouche, Decho.
Good morning, Caitlin Cleveland, MLA Cam Lake.
Thank you. Any members on the phone, Madam Clerk? None?
No on the phone today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Welcome, Deputy Minister. Please introduce your staff to proceed with your opening remarks and presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today we are pleased to provide a presentation on the Remediation Economy discussion paper. The GNWT committed to the development of this paper in Emerging Stronger. The discussion paper assesses potential economic opportunities tied to remediation for businesses and employment in the NWT. With me today is Acting Assistant Deputy Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Julian Canagan, and Director of Environmental Protection and Waste Management, Yip Young. From ECE, we have Michael Saturnino, the Assistant Deputy Minister of Labour and Income Security, and Steve St. Pierre, Assistant Director of Labour and Development Standards. I'd also like to introduce from ITI, Menzie McEachern, the Assistant Deputy Minister of Mineral and Petroleum Resources. With the Chair's permission, I would like to ask Acting Deputy Minister Julian Canagan to provide the committee with a presentation on findings and next steps to support NWT residents and businesses to participate in a remediation economy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Mr. Go ahead, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sharing my screen right now and presentation to share with you today. Pleased to provide this presentation on the remediation economy and discussion paper and the GNWT's proposed next steps. So for an outline today in this presentation, we'll discuss the background as to why the GNWT developed the remediation economy discussion paper. We'll talk about our collaboration with CERNAC to date. We'll talk about the key highlights in the discussion paper, as well as key milestones, phases, and timelines. And we'll end with our proposed next steps for the GNWT. So for background, in the spring of 2021, the GNWT committed to assessing the potential for the development of a remediation economy within the NWT in Emerging Stronger. This led to the development of a discussion paper to assess the potential for opportunities related to remediation economy in the NWT. ENR has led this work to date in collaboration with the departments of ITI, ECE, and Finance. As the scope of work was under development, we also learned that the Federal Department of Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, or CERNAC, was doing similar work. And as such, the GNWT partnered with CERNAC and contracted a consultant to develop two items, one being a business opportunity profile for CERNAC to apply for Federal Strategic Partnership, or SPI, Phase 1 funding, and two, a discussion paper for the GNWT. So together, the business opportunity profile and the discussion paper characterize the current landscape of the remediation economy by identifying opportunities, challenges, and gaps. So as I previously mentioned, the GNWT did partner with CERNAC early in the process, and there's a lot of value in this collaborative approach with CERNAC. And on this slide, I'd like to describe this further because it has bearing on the slides that follow in our next steps. So CERNAC NWT region is leading a collaborative initiative to seek funds through the Federal Strategic Partnership Initiatives, or SPI. Launched in 2010, SPY aims to increase Indigenous participation in large, complex, multi-year economic opportunities that span a range of sectors. SPY is led by the Department of Indigenous Services Canada, but also partners with 21 other federal departments and agencies. SPY funding has an allocation of $14.45 million each year. There are two phases of CERNAC's work toward the SPY funding process. The first phase was to complete CERNAC's opportunity profile and move to the next stage of application for SPY funding, which is now complete. The next phase of CERNAC's work will be to build on the opportunity profile and the discussion paper. This includes further detailed analysis of labor and skills development and business and capacity needs for Indigenous businesses. CERNAC has established an advisory committee and is conducting targeted engagement between now and June 2022. The GNWT has been participating in these committees and engagement sessions. Ultimately, CERNAC's goal for phase 2 is to develop an action plan with input from stakeholders. The action plan will include specific actions that focus on Indigenous businesses and their capital and capacity needs. And this action plan will be used to seek further SPY funding for implementation. So now I'm going to talk about the discussion paper and highlights from that paper. The GNWT's discussion paper presents economic potential, strengths, challenges, and opportunities, and also includes high-level recommendations. So some key takeaways from the discussion paper include that there are over 400 sites in the NWT that are anticipated to require assessment, remediation, and/or long-term monitoring activities. This list of sites includes those that are the responsibility of the Government of Canada, the GNWT, and mining companies. Over the next 30 years, economic analysis indicates that the potential of the remediation economy is estimated at over 1.7 billion, with a corresponding GDP of 843 million. It should be noted that these numbers are influenced by preliminary giant mine cost estimates, and it's important to recognize that the final project implementation plan cost estimates will be approved by the Federal Government Treasury Board in the fall of 2022, at which point numbers will be recalibrated. Remediation will support up to 250 to 290 full-time equivalent or FTE jobs per year for at least 15 years. These cost estimates demonstrate that while there will be growth in the sector over the next 15 years, remediation is not a magic bullet for the territory's economy. However, there is certainly an opportunity to ensure Northern residents and businesses are fully supported and ready to participate in remediation. Remediation activities are reliant on additional development and/or resource extraction, and there will be a sharp decrease in activity if there is limited future development. We should also note that remediation is a non-revenue generating activity, so profit margins are lower and activities are largely dependent on government funding. In the next few slides, I'll provide further detail on some of the key elements from the discussion paper. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, we estimate the economic potential for remediation activities will be about $1.7 billion with a corresponding GDP of 843 million. If we forecast this over the next 30 years, we're looking at an estimated cost of about $114 million per year for the next 5 years. That's the short term. $98 million per year for years 6 to 15. That's the medium term. And $14 million per year for years 16 to 30, which is the long term. The main takeaway from this is that over 90% of the spending will likely occur in the short to medium term. And this is due to the fact that the majority of large abandoned mine remediation projects like Giant Mine are taking place over the next 15 years. In addition, the NWT's diamond mines are expected to close within the next 15 years. We should note that these numbers do not account for any new sites, such as a new mine that might close within the next 30 years. With respect to labor, I mentioned we can expect up to 250 to 290 full-time equivalent jobs per year for at least the next 15 years. Due to the location of the diamond mines and the giant mine remediation project, the North Slave region is forecasted to have the greatest activity over the next 10 to 15 years. That's that short to medium time frame by a significant margin. The SAW2 region has the next highest projected remediation activity due to projects like the Great Bear Lake Remediation Project and the Norman Wells oil field. Spending in the other three regions will be significantly lower than the North Slave, but these cost estimates should not discount the opportunities for small enterprises in the Beaufort Delta, Decho, and South Slave regions to support remediation activities. So on this slide, I would like to highlight key milestones for moving forward for both the GNWT and CERNAC. And you'll see on this slide, moving along the top, or the green boxes, are the key milestones for the GNWT. Moving along the bottom, or the blue boxes, are the key milestones for CERNAC. And you can see interrelationships between the two, particularly in phase 2 and phase 3. The different phases move from left to right across the slide. So for phase 1 on the left side of the slide, as we've previously discussed, phase 1 for both the GNWT and CERNAC is now complete, and we're currently working on phase 2. Phase 2, that's the middle of the slide. The GNWT's phase 2 work will be to conduct broad public engagement. In addition, the GNWT will continue to collaborate with CERNAC. CERNAC's phase 2 work involves a more detailed analysis of labor and capital or business needs and engagement, with the goal of a defined action plan for SPY funding submission in June 2022. The SPY funding application can only focus on supporting Indigenous businesses, whereas through this initiative, the GNWT seeks to support both Northern and Indigenous businesses and individuals. Both governments recognize there is an opportunity to collaborate on this work and conduct engagement to inform clear actions that can address the challenges or constraints identified and to further maximize opportunities for Northerners, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. Moving to the right-hand side of the slide, or phase 3, the GNWT's phase 3 work is to be determined and will really depend on public engagement. However, we do know the collaborative approach with CERNAC to develop an action plan will inform a GNWT next steps document. This next steps document will also be informed by regional economic development profiles being undertaken by ITI this coming summer and fall season. If CERNAC is successful in their SPY application, then they will implement their action plan with a focus on supporting Indigenous businesses. However, it is recognized that for SPY implementation to be successful, CERNAC will need GNWT support, which could include training, skills development, supporting Northern and Indigenous businesses, and others. This is my last slide, looking at GNWT next steps. So as I mentioned, concurrent to our own internal process between February and June, the GNWT has been and will continue to collaborate with CERNAC on its phase 2 work. And this has included collaborating to complete additional labor and capital business analysis, participating in committee meetings and targeted engagement sessions, and collaborating with CERNAC on SPY funding to develop an action plan. Beginning in May 2022, the GNWT will also conduct broad public engagement related to the results of the discussion paper. And an overview document of the key findings of the discussion paper will be posted on the GNWT engagement landing page for public input. After the SPY funding submission in June 2022, and dependent on successful funding, the GNWT will then carry out relevant actions committed to in the action plan. In addition, the GNWT will produce a next steps report, which will be further developed with input from ITI's regional economic development profile work planned for 2022-2023. We'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Julian, or Mr. Canagan. Thank the Deputy Minister for your presentation. Now, if any of my members have any questions for the Deputy or any of her colleagues, members. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would we be able to get can I just get a bit more information on the $1.7 billion estimate and whether committee could get a breakdown of how we're attributing to that to projects? To be honest, that actually seems a little low to me when I just kind of go through my back of a paper napkin, we already got $1 billion with Giant, and then we got 3 diamond mines, and then we got all the sumps, and we got Cameron Hills, and I imagine based on what we're seeing in the SAW2 projections that I'm curious where we got the Norman Wells number. They've been pumping oil for 100 years there. I really cannot see that being a cheap cleanup. So I'm just curious if we can get a bit more information on perhaps there are some things excluded in that 1.7 billion or a breakdown on how that figure is reached. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Deputy Minister Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll pass this to Julian or Menzie. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Deputy Minister. I'll start and then I'll pass it to Menzie. For certain, we used information that we do have that is publicly available. And so to give you a bit more insight into the data that was used, ITI completed economic modeling based on the following information: mining company closure plans, including security submissions for permitting requirements, federal and territorial remediation project cost forecasts and liability estimates, as well as additional publicly available information sources. So we recognize that available data was limited due to the nature of the work, as not all sites have detailed remediation costs yet for most territorial and federal projects. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Mr. McEachran.
Okay, thank you, Julian. Mr. McEachran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, further to Julian's point, as more data and information emerges and becomes publicly available for the upcoming and future remediation projects in the territory, those estimates will be modified and, to the MLA's point, likely increased. So this $1.7 billion estimate we think is certainly an underestimate, and will be increased as our understanding of reclamation project costs comes forward. And that would include an understanding of the future reclamation costs of Imperial Norman Wells. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McEachran. Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think this is some good timing that CERNAC is also doing similar work at the same time. I guess I'll just make a couple comments. I look forward to seeing the action plan, but I think we really need to get into the weeds of specific projects, and perhaps this isn't the meeting to do it. We've heard a number of complaints that Giant is not leaving the kind of knowledge and legacy of skill building that we want it to. We had a meeting yesterday about Ptarmigan and the accepted sites, which, I imagine added a few extra $100 million to that number. And we, as committee, have been in Norman Wells, and it's clear that there is a lot more to discover there. Their landfill is full of hazardous waste. They keep finding things from, the 40s and 50s and 60s in that area. And I think there's probably some political work to be done with, federal counterparts who own part of the equity of that, to really make sure that is a model remediation project. It provided a lot of oil to Canada for a long time. So I guess those are just some comments that I think when I see the action plan, I'd really like to, make sure we're having those conversations on specific sites and what we need to do to make sure they move along at a model and what lessons we can learn from Giant Mine. But thank you, everyone, for presenting today.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Ms. Kelly, Dr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the comments. I think that that folks are well aware that there are specific processes per site that need to be undertaken to determine what level of remediation and what activities will be taken there. So while there can be discussion at a higher level about the outlook for some of these sites, the specifics about what will happen with remediation are site dependent, and they require engagement with Indigenous governments and communities in the area to discuss what the next steps are. So I'll leave it at that. Happy to engage in those conversations, but there's still work to be done. And the other point that I'll make here is that not all of these sites will end up being fully remediated. It will depend on the risk to human health and the environment as well. So there's these discussions will need to be ongoing for sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Ms. Cleveland.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to staff from all the departments who have joined us here today and presented. I have a couple of I guess procurement concerns as the department works through the action plan. One of my concerns that I am hearing that relates to the giant mine cleanup is that CERNAC kind of holds the control of what the key players are in participating in that. And one of the things that I'm hearing is that the fines for not following through on what you intend to do when you bid on a contractor are something that contractors are simply just building into the cost of doing business rather than following through on their commitments to whether it be northern employment or whether it be Indigenous employment. And so my concern is that there's not really consequences for not following through on what people say that they're going to do. And so I'm wondering if that is, in this partnership with CERNAC, if that is some of the questions that the GNWT anticipates being able to kind of pursue in this partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cleveland. Dr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the responsible party, the procurement would be tied to who the responsible party for the site is, the lead on procurement for sure. I'll ask if Yip and Menzie can speak to the work that's been done related to socioeconomic benefits from Giant, please, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Mr. McEachran, or...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps I'll start and then pass it over to Yip. So we, meaning GNWT, ITI, and ENR, have been working on an analysis of the procurement thus far over the last few years, at least since 2017, when Parsons became the main contract manager for the Giant remediation project. And so we were able to access data related to Parsons contracting. And so we do have an understanding, and we'll be communicating that publicly about the sort of performance, for lack of a better word, of Parsons in northern procurement, and in fact their northern procurement has been looking very strong over the last few years, which is good, and hopefully they'll be able to continue to build on that with new innovations to their procurement practices and policies. To the MLA's concern, I am not familiar with that particular element in terms of lack of consequences in following through on certain contract requirements on northern procurement. So that's something we would have to take away and understand further. And through our ongoing engagement with the Giant Mine Remediation Project, of course, as co-leads with Canada, really seek to see if there's a real issue there and how that might be addressed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McEachran. Yip.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nothing further to add. based on what Lindsay just said. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Cleveland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My next question is also a concern in regards to procurement and contracting in working with the federal government. One of the switches in procurement that's happening at the federal level that I'm hearing from Cam Lake businesses is it relates to building maintenance, but it could easily be something that's imported over to remediation or site maintenance. And that's the federal government is taking to using large companies like Brookfield Johnson in order to contract to, and then subcontracting comes out of that. And it ends up cutting out a lot of NWT businesses because of the security requirements for the contracts. And so it ties up a lot of business dollars in that if a contract is over $100,000, the business has to be able to put up a deposit of 50% in order to partake in the contract. So you have to be able to pay money in order to work for the federal government, essentially through their contracting general contractor. I don't know, however you want to call that. And my concern is that if this becomes a practice across the federal government, that they'll end up cutting out a lot of NWT businesses that are trying to make a go of the remediation economy. And so I know that this relates to Cernak again, but if they are kind of the lead on a site, my concern is that, again, NWT businesses will lose out because of federal policies. And so I just want to better understand how the GNWT is able to work with their partner to make sure that federal policies don't cut out NWT businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cleveland. Dr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So these are the exact types of points that we're looking for with the engagement that we're going to be working on, and that ITI will be leading with support from ECE and ENR over the next while. So I think it would be great to encourage those that you're speaking with to participate in the engagement. I'll also turn it to Yip just to comment on this from a Giant perspective. My understanding is through the main construction management with that the whole intention is to break it down into small pieces so that it is accessible to the businesses in the NWT. But I'll just ask Yip to add to that, Mr. Chair, please.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Yip.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that is correct. Parsons is the main construction manager for the Giant Mine Remediation project. And one of the intent of having a main construction manager is to split up the very large projects into smaller chunks so that smaller businesses in the NWT can take advantage of being able to apply and win some of those contracts. In terms of the federal procurement process related to build and maintenance, I can't speak to that, but we do have influence when we sit at the table on the Giant Mine Remediation project, and we can take this back to the Cernak team as well and dig a little deeper, but Giant Mine related. And then, as Aaron had indicated, going forward with some of the engagement that we're doing on the remediation economy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dip. Mrs. Cleveland.
May I ask a third question, or would you like me to go back on the list?
Oh, thank you, Ms. Cleveland. I'll put you back on the list. Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My apologies for being late this morning. I had a doctor's appointment first thing. So I may have missed some of the presentation and perhaps my question was answered. So just bear with me if that's the case. I'm curious to know, I know that ITI and others have looked at the different aspects of the mine lives that are going now. But however, obviously the mines are progressing or using their progressive reclamation as they're operating in order to have less work at the end that is required for remediation. So I guess my question is around how do the departments see sort of the updating or the iterative nature of this work and ensuring that as mines move through progressive reclamation, there's updates to these estimates and such, because I mean the idea for them is that they save a bunch of money in the end by doing work as they go, which then would then drop this number estimated because I'm assuming a lot of that is based on the original reclamation plans and not necessarily the updated, which I know the government would be trying to keep on top of. So I guess where I'm going with this is when can we see updates happening? What is the process going to look like with the remediation economy over the next while? Thank you. I don't know if that was a good question.
Thank you, Ms. Cleveland. Dr. Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one of the responses previous responses that would lend to this is that the estimates are an underestimate at this time because they're based on publicly available information. And the departments have committed to continually update the estimates as we receive more public information. So as the the closure and reclamation plans are updated, the estimates would be updated as well. And so it will be an iterative process over time. The exact process hasn't been determined yet, as we're working through and trying to get to the next steps phase, and we want to have the input from those as we go through public engagement. But we'll definitely be coming back with a what we heard and next steps document, and keeping those estimates up to date will be part of that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Ms. Knockleby?
Thank you. I guess without having delved into the detail that maybe the department has or through the document as much as I need to, I actually am not sure if I agree that it's an underestimate in the sense of, I find this to be one where when we're budgeting out for environmental work, it's always tough to make the estimates. And in my history, I've always found that, there seems to be sort of this dartboard of throwing darts at it and seeing what number might be the possible remediation cost. It depends on levels of remediation. Are you remediating to industrial? Are you remediating to parkland? All of that. So I think I'll be curious to see how that all falls out as it progresses. And, in my mind, I would actually like to see a less remediation economy, because in the sense I would like to see things being done better so that we're not relying on dirty sites in order to bolster our economy. My only question in all of that, though, is when will the discussion paper be available for industry and the public to look at, and how long will the engagement period be? I have concerns when I look at the ENR flood engagement that had a 2-week survey window only, and was done on online manner from what I can tell. I had a lot of people after the fact tell me they never knew that survey was even out there. So I just wanted to reiterate, I guess, that this one being as important as it is, that the engagement be actively reaching out to the associations, so Association of Communities, the Construction Association, the engineers. I don't want it to be a passive engagement, I guess, and I maybe have missed that in the presentation on the plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Knockleby. Dr. Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were a number of points there. I'll try to make sure that I address them, and then I'll see if Julian or Menzie have anything that they'd like to add to that. The first one being that we're quite certain that it is an underestimate in the sense that we know that there's data that we don't have available with respect to costs for projects that are upcoming at this time, because the estimates are not complete. That would be something just to lay that on the table from the beginning. That was one of the comments that was missed earlier. I think that the intent is to have the document out in May. So we're hoping to release it after we've done this briefing, and there will be a fulsome engagement period. I'm not certain what engagement the MLA is speaking about, and would be happy to understand the concern better, but there will be fulsome engagement on this. The intention is, while CERNAC is engaging with Indigenous businesses, and the GNWT will be taking part in that process, to also expand that out to other northern businesses as well. And I can't remember if I missed one of the other pieces of that, but I'll ask Mr. Chair to turn it over to Julian and Menzie to make sure see if they have anything they'd like to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Mr. Cannigan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Aaron answered all of the questions. There was one comment in the presentation maybe that was missed in that we'll be also looking to the engagement on the regional economic development profile work. So will be a fulsome engagement over a period of definitely longer than 2 weeks, and plan for it to be an active engagement. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cannigan. Ms. Knockleby?
Oh, I also had 2 questions already, so please. I'm good,
I was
actually.
going to
Thank
give
you.
you. Okay, thank you. Ms. Cleveland?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I can see Mr. Saturnino sitting there, and I didn't want him to feel left out this morning. So I just wanted to ask a question about immigration. I know that the primary goal is always made in the north, business opportunities, and one of the things that I hear often is that we don't have the expertise or the skilled labor in the Northwest Territories to do some of the work that we want to do. And so I'm wondering if part of this action plan is looking at targeted skilled worker immigration from countries that have experience with mine remediation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Cleveland. I have a constituent visiting me, and it's not me. Dr. Kelly.
I'll turn that over to Mr. Saturnino, please.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Mr. Saturnino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think with regards to the labor components associated with the remediation economy, we would tackle that from a larger scope as far as looking at what the needs would be. Of course, looking to provide as many opportunities for NWT residents first. However, if there are needs that are particularly specialized or that we don't have in the Northwest Territories, then clearly there may be a need to look elsewhere outside of the territory. I would not take immigration off the table as far as what those needs may be. There may be opportunities there to be able to use all of the avenues and all the resources we have available to ensure that these projects are able to be managed accordingly. But I think that, generally speaking, the focus is really when you look at some of many of the positions are positions that we believe could be beneficial to NWT residents, and we would look to try and maximize that first, and then clearly looking at some of those specialized skills or skilled opportunities, skilled occupations, and of course looking to fill those needs where they're needed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Saturnino. Mrs. Cleveland.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I appreciate that. And like I said, I know the goal is always made in the north, and I think that's the right goal to have as a priority. I think though, if we don't have skills here, if there are opportunities to proactively grow our territory and get some skills here that can be passed along, there's always good opportunities to keep benefits in the territory. And so I appreciate that. And I look forward to the action plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cleveland. Dr. Kelly, give you opportunity, more of a comment.
Thank you for the comment, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Members, anybody else have any questions for Dr. Kelly and the staff? Katrina? My screen is...
No, I'm good, thank you. I'm just excited to see more come out of the Giant Mine project, and I guess I will say maybe something a little bit there. I have a long history of working on Giant Mine, and having bid on projects with Parsons and others now in that sort of, I shouldn't signal out the company, but in that construction management type model, I don't think that it really has had the intent of keeping those dollars in the north that was needed. When the federal government is arranging bidders meetings and they're flying all their staff up from Alberta to give the bidders meeting, I think that's a really clear signal to everybody in the north really how focused CERNAC is on ensuring that money stays in the north, and that's concerning to me. When the local Indigenous organization bids on a contract and fails miserably because the Indigenous portion of that is really only the tiebreaker, and I was literally told that when I had my debrief, that the only time the Indigenous piece was going to actually take have any effect was if I was tied with another company technically, and therefore then they would look at that as the tiebreaker. So I think there is some real work that needs to be done on the procurement around Giant Mine in particular, and honestly I would have a look at whether or not that contract management company is invested in the North, and you know, whether or not that money really is staying and building the capacity that it was meant to when it was determined. And at the time, I had bid on that contract as well with the company I was with, and I was told unofficially that we had a far more superior technical bid. I would have actually trained somebody to take over my environmental management position that was Indigenous within 5 years of me taking the project, but it all came down to money because the other bidders bid $25 million less. And I can guarantee you, they've paid the $25 million in the meantime. So, you know, it was lip service. So I guess more of a comment than anything, and it's not the people in this room, but I do want that to be aware that, you know, while the federal government may say some really good things, I don't think it's actually happening in action. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Nalkaby, for your comments. And any other questions from any other members? Hearing none, thank you, Deputy Ministers. Thank you all, your staff from ENR, EC&E, and ITI for joining us here today. This concludes the public portion of our meeting. Thank you, everybody, and have a good day.
Thank you.